So we're picking up in this lecture cast where we left off in the last version, and where France established the Second Republic, and we talked about the repression of General Cavaignac and the basically putting down the revolt and the formation of a new liberal/conservative coalition. Sorry, my mouse keeps making weird noises, so I'm just going to unhook it here. So anyway, and the coalition, as we said, was opposed to lower class radicalism, but they were trying to establish some sense of order. So in November of 1848, this new constitution that was established provided for an elected president and a one-house, again, a unicameral legislature. All right, so there we go. In the election of 1848, again, they came up with a new government, so they got to have an election. So you need to know this. In December of 1848, Louis Napoleon defeats General Cavaignac, the hero that saved the day and restored order. But this new guy, Louis Napoleon, became president of the Republic. Now, we will go into much greater detail on him in the next chapter, but what this represents is a big shift from the middle class, from leaning liberal and towards the left, where the middle class is now going to, in the face, in the aftermath of all the rioting and the stuff that you guys have seen, if you've seen the movie Les Mis, they are now going to shift more towards the right of center, and they're going to want basically law and order. So Louis Napoleon was able to appeal first to everybody. He appealed to the workers because he was an outsider. He had, in his younger days, written some socialist-leaning literature, so that was kind of popular with them. And he actually had been exiled to Great Britain. While he was there, he was a magistrate, and it was kind of interesting because this is where he's going to appeal to the middle class and the conservatives. He became known as a law and order guy, a Wyatt Earp type guy, in the midst of, in England, a lot of the Chartist agitation and revolts. So it's kind of interesting. This guy is appealing to the right and the left, and people also were appealed, or they liked his name. The fact of the matter is he was a Louis, and he was a Bonaparte. He was a Napoleon. And so this part of his resume really appealed to almost every faction in France that was so divided here in 1848. Now, once elected, we will see that he becomes very, very conservative. And as I said, stay tuned for Realpolitik in Chapter 22. So as the old adage goes, France sneezes, the rest of Europe, just like in 1830, just like in 1789, catches a cold. So now we're going to talk about another revolt, yet again in Italy. So a lot of upheaval in Italy in 1848. Italian nationalists and liberals, their goal was to end the foreign domination of Italy. Who was it dominated by? It was basically dominated by, as we've said, since the Congress of Vienna, by Austria. So in 1848, Milan, Lombardy, and Venetia expelled their Austrian rulers, their Austrian puppet rulers. Bourbon rulers in Sicily and Naples were also defeated in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And then Sardinia, Piedmont declared all-out war on Austria. And it appeared that everything at this phase initially was going to go well for the Italians and going in the right directions for the liberals and the nationalists. However, it didn't end up very well for these guys. A couple key people here that you need to know. Giuseppe Mazzini established the Roman Republic in 1849, and he was protected by a military guru by the name of Giuseppe Garibaldi, and his forces were really, really doing well against the Austrians and whoever else they were fighting at this particular time. In fact, they did so well, Pope Pius IX actually was forced to flee Rome, and it looked like, as I said, everything was going just as planned until Austrian General Radetzky, again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, crushed the opposition in Sardinia, Piedmont, who was kind of leading the way here on Metternich's orders. So you have basically a conservative backlash here. King Victor Emmanuel II takes the throne in Sardinia, Piedmont, and the Italian unification that so many could almost taste would have to go into hiding, would have to go underground. So it didn't work out too well. There were a few reasons why the Italian unification efforts failed, and it basically was like we'll see in Germany here in a second. The revolutionaries were not united. Rural people did not really necessarily support the revolutions. They had different interests than the people that live in the urban areas and the more liberal factions. The revolutionaries also, you had fear of radicals among the moderates, the people in the middle, as we've seen in France. They don't want to really be associated with socialists. They do want some reform, but they don't want to upend the entire system. So most important, the moderates and the middle class did not want to lose their private property to the radical socialist factions. So the lack of leadership and administrative experience among the revolutionaries really proved to be a deficiency for them. They knew what they wanted, but each faction had different ideas of how they should achieve their goals and how far they should make reforms. So let's go into Austria. We get into Austria here. The Habsburg Empire was really, really vulnerable to revolutionary challenges of nationalism. We've talked about this. You have so many different ethnic minorities seeking different nationalistic goals. Again, we've mentioned this. You have Hungarians, you have Slavs, Czechs, Italians, Serbs, Croatians, and others. You have more non-Germans than actually Germans living in the Austrian Empire. And as you can see back on that map, Austria is very culturally and racially divided. As I said, only about 25% of the population is actually German. A lot of those different ethnic minorities had nationalistic aspirations of ruling their own country. So as a result, the Austrian government that we've talked about since the Congress of Vienna is very, very repressive and very, very reactionary. Liberal institutions are not tolerated. They're almost non-existent, and when they are in existence, they are repressed immediately. Social reliance on serfdom also doomed the masses of the people to a life without hope. As we said, the further east you go in Europe, the more likely the serfdom, they clung to serfdom, and it was more a society basically like the society that we learned about early in the year. It was basically like feudalism. So they had no hope of acquiring land, they had no social mobility or being able to move up or down a class, and they had no access to education. So things looked pretty bleak for them. The government, as a result, was inefficient and corrupt and basically didn't care to do anything to help those people in any way, shape, or form. The main concern at the national level was foreign policy involving and enforcing the Congress of Vienna settlement, as well as the new rivalry which Austria saw competing economically with basically their little brother to the north, the great state or the emerging power of Prussia. So in the February Revolution in France sparked rebellion for liberal reforms in France. It also stimulated, and again there's that sneeze analogy again, they sneezed in France, so this spread over into Austria. And again, basically what you have by March 13th, rioting breaks out in Vienna. The Austrian Empire actually wasn't ready for this. The empire collapsed. Metternich actually fled and went into hiding, as you can see, and the Constituent Assembly met and they abolished serfdom. So things looked up, just like it had early on in the Italian efforts. The revolution, though, began to wane. The revolutionary government that was established failed to govern effectively, as there were too many groups, again, with their own agendas, who could not unite to solve the problems of the big picture. As it became apparent that Ferdinand, the Austrian emperor, had lost control, Ferdinand agreed to abdicate in favor of his nephew. Now, his nephew's name was Franz Joseph. Okay, this is Franz Joseph I, and he wanted to restore the imperial government. However, he was not able to defeat the Hungarians and Louis Kossuth. Okay, so we get into that. He had trouble with the Hungarians, and here's live action footage, as you can see. So you might ask, who the heck is Louis Kossuth? Well, you read about him. He's a Hungarian revolutionary leader, all about nationalism. And they revolted when Austria had collapsed under Ferdinand. That was their chance. This was a student movement, just like the Burschenschaften that we had talked about earlier. They revolted, and workers staged mass demonstrations. Metternich fled the country, as we've already said, and the Hungarian armies actually drove within sight of Vienna, so they had a lot of success. Now, they were ultimately defeated, as we know, and again, basically, the Austrians were able to put down this revolt with the help of Slavs. Okay, as again we talked about the divisive factions and nationalities, the other smaller groups didn't want to see the Magyars, or the Hungarians as they were known, dominate their lands. Additionally, Austria and Russia got in the action and teamed up. Russia didn't like the chaos near their borders, so it was kind of like the old Holy Alliance proposal of Alexander I. And Nicholas I gets involved and decides he's going to help Franz Joseph put this revolt down. So Hungary, the revolts do fail. They're going to have to wait, though, until 1867 and 1866 and 1867 for their autonomy and self-rule. So their revolution in 1848 was a failure. Basically, a big part of that is right here. Tsar Nicholas I raises an army of 400,000 in response from a request by Franz Joseph. 140,000 put down the revolt. Okay, now there are some developments here that we need to know. There was a conference in Prague, and they developed the notion of Austro-Slavism. Okay, and that is a constitution and autonomy within from within the Habsburg Empire. And again, this is something that will make more sense as well as we get into chapter 22. But in other words, some of these groups would able to be still part of the Austrian Empire. However, they would have their own local government and laws under their own language, basically only allied with the Austrian Empire in foreign policy and war. So you basically were able to rule yourself, but if there was a war that Austria got into, then you guys were linked at the hip in terms of foreign policy. Now you'll see this happen in 1867 with the creation of the dual monarchy. So that's where you get Austria-Hungary. Again, one country, but they're going to have two different parliaments. The Hungarian faction, they're all in charge of all the aspects of ruling Hungary. However, again, in World War I, they fought as Austria-Hungary. They were fighting as one country. So the revolutions in Austria failed because the revolutionary government failed to govern effectively. Again, we talked about too much divisiveness, and that's what you had. So just took you through Italy and France, and the end of France and Austria in that faction. In the next episode, we will revisit what happens in Prussia. Thanks for listening.